And of course it just didn't make a sound, so I couldn't place it.
What sort of speed do you think it was travelling at?
40 miles an hour? It
Right.
wasn't fast.
Eerily, it looked just like an object spotted over Belgium in 1990, which so spooked authorities that F-16 fighter jets were scrambled to intercept it. That were in 1990, and they've put a picture of that one as well, which looks pretty much dead on what I saw, to be honest.
Right.
This object was coming over the top of the houses, and I could see the red lights were starting at the front of the object and flashing down the sides of the object. So initially this was a head-on view, and clearly wasn't anything that I could recognise. Right. So as it drew closer, I could make out it was a flat triangular shape.
It just maintained the same speed, it didn't alter. But looking at it from underneath, I was seeing a light there, is that in frame? A light there and a light there. About 3/4 football pitch.
Right, all right, okay. So
is a rough.
Pretty big then?
Yes,
yeah,
it was
right.
pretty big.
And what I was seeing was red lights flashing sequentially down the craft from the front to the back, the full length of the object, say about 10 lights. And again, as it started coming closer, I was now more looking side on, and the height of this thing was probably around 500 metres, I'm guessing, so not very high at all, but certainly high enough above the houses. But as the first object came into closer and came side on, a second object identical to the first one appeared underneath it. And
I noticed that the sky around the lights started to sort of wobble, in effect, like a rippling effect around the outside of what turned out to be a triangular shaped craft. And once it started to ripple, you could see this object materialising. It was just like Star Trek, like decloaking right in front of our eyes around the lights. Once we realised that it was a craft there, the craft floated its nose into the air. Now I say floated, it manoeuvred like no other craft I've seen. I've been in the aircraft industry, I've been to air shows, I know what craft look like when they move about. This thing was floating. It looked like it was underwater, like a submarine.
A size, again guessing, is 20 to 30 metres long, the objects. Certainly not huge like some reports have said of football field size objects. Certainly wasn't that big, but larger than your average two-seater plane or what have you.
Basically there were just these 4 big lights along the back, and like I say, they weren't parallel to the ground, they were tilted at an angle. Now I also noticed during the course there was a little light off to one side. It turns out that would be the one underneath the nose at the front, but at this point we didn't know that. We could just see 4 lights at the back and 1 under the front. And it was at this point that the triangle tilted up in the air, but it rose, like I say, like a submarine underwater. Now once it did that, we could see on top of the surface all these lines interlocking, looked like girders.
Any noise at all?
No, and again this was the thing that drew on me then, is that I couldn't hear a thing.
Right. And what sort of speed?
And again the speed was most definitely slower than your average airspeed for any aircraft that I've seen. So they were almost, you could say drifting, but there was no bobbing motion. They were on a very set, steady course.
This is showing the central white core of the craft, and I've tried to show here how the top and the bottom rolled over like this hovercraft skin effect or pastry on a pie. But the thing I remember about this particular view is there was no nuts and bolts, no rivets, no welding. It almost been sympathetically put together.
As they went past, I noticed behind them, separated by a few hundred metres again, was another pair of identical objects.
And were they like directly one below the other, or were they offset? So
they weren't offset, they were directly above each other.
All right.
So one pair drifted past, then another pair, and I counted 8 pairs, 4 pairs, 8 craft.
8 craft.
But what I would say is we stood there, and in the distance flying away from us was the largest flying craft I've ever seen in my life, bearing in mind my aircraft experience from the past. It was a huge craft. It was the size of a football field. It got 4 red lights at the back again, but this time on the enormous wings there was a white light at the end of each wing it wasn't strobing, it was just shining. It was shining up the surface of the craft on both sides, and this huge thing was flying away from us.
Right.
We could only assume that the small craft had gone back to the larger craft.
Just before they went out of view, I was getting a slight angle of the back end of the craft. And again, that was just flat, slightly different again, no red lights on the back, but there were two squares of purple light. And again, not a colour that I've ever seen on any aircraft.
Right.
Very distinctive, bright purple, but of they were dimmer than the red flashing lights.
Right.
And I can only guess that they were part of the propulsion system.
Right. But were they making any noise, or was there any flame or anything?
There was no flame, no, couldn't see any flame or gas coming out the back. It was just light.
Right. And any noise at all?
Absolutely none whatsoever, and more importantly, there were no smells. You couldn't smell anything. There was no fuel being burnt from like a conventional engine.
Bear in mind, these witnesses are just a sample of over 40 black triangle cases I now have in my database. One very strange aspect which crops up again and again in witness statements is these craft seem to have the ability to appear or disappear in situ. On occasions, witnesses will just see a light, then a triangular craft will seem to materialise around it. This doesn't necessarily mean the material of the craft is being manifested from another dimension. It could be that a field effect around the craft is making the light normally emitted behave differently, therefore making it invisible. I asked some of the witnesses, who do you think these objects belong to? It's possibly military, even though it made itself invisible, you still think they've got that technology?
Oh yeah. It's either military or aliens, isn't it? And that's it.
Right. Why are they flying over between Pontefract and Rotherham?
God knows.
Yeah. That's the answer. That's the question that I'm addressing. Yeah.
Why would they do it?
Whether it's a secret, some sort of secret aircraft that's been developed, or it's of some other origin, I don't know. But immediately think spaceships, aliens. I would personally think it could be something like an aircraft of from
some
us.
secret human
That's
craft.
right, yeah.
So why would it be sitting there just hovering above the traffic?
Well, maybe I tend to think like a moth to a candlelight.
Obviously something completely unlike our known military aircraft.
So it is an airspace that I know is used by the military.
Right.
Not commercial aircraft that low.
Right. ET or military?
Well, I can only guess that it's most likely come from ET, whether it's ET or our military now, or another government's military. Anybody's guess. That's speculation, isn't it?
I mean, some people have said to me, was it perhaps the stealth fighter or the stealth bomber? Well, at that distance, I mean, this thing was only like 100 feet away from us. The stealth fighter, the F-117 weighs, I think it's 3,800 pounds, but it's only got two engines which produce 30,000 pounds of thrust. It hasn't got enough, but if it had 38,000 pounds of thrust, it would have to stand on its end with engines on full blast just to hover. This craft was not doing that. This craft was manoeuvring around with no noise whatsoever, in the most peculiar fashion.
Right. So if it was a stealth aircraft, it's using a propulsion system that hasn't been disclosed yet, presumably.
That's right, yes. Yeah. My own personal feeling from the whole experience that it's definitely not one of ours. I've never seen anything quite like it. Now, if this is a secret project from the military, what are they doing in the Leicestershire countryside, jumping out on people, driving along in the cars? It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
The craft seemed to be in no panic to get away from us. After the event, not prior to it, because it's my first experience of anything paranormal. I have had other experiences. That makes, for me, 100% certain that this is not a man-made object.
I decided to compare notes with 3 of the UK's leading UFO researchers.
I dare say if you sorted all out the triangular reports, we'd have quite a phenomenal number of sightings of the Black Triangle. And they're in a marked police vehicle, and they see in the area of Northolt, Middlesex, a huge black triangular object, which he describes as the size of 3 football pitches. And I said, well, how do you know it was that big? And he says, because it was over 3 football pitches.
Well, he said it was something around that sort of size, almost the size of a football pitch.
And basically, it was no noise. huge proportions, low to the ground, as low as 50 feet at one point, and it was just motionless, hanging there, and then seen for a few minutes, and then gone.
In most cases, they're either completely silent or sometimes emit a sort of low humming type sound, as sometimes heard.
And the amazing thing is that in the 1990s, they were coming over majestically over the landscape, as if completely impervious of what was happening below them. But they were coming over, moving ever so slow, as you said before, with a light at each corner and the big light in the middle. About 24 police officers across 6 counties had basically tracked one or two objects. We saw initially what we thought was a very bright spherical light travelling relatively low in the sky. The object was travelling north to south, having come over the sea at Bideford Bay. We stopped and got out of our police car, and as the object approached us from directly in front of us, we realised that this object was connected in some way to 2 duller lights which were travelling behind on each side of the main bright light that was effectively in a triangular formation. It travelled fast and most strangely was completely silent. It was a clear, still night. The object was enormous in dimensions overall and was like nothing we'd ever seen or experienced. Overall dimensions approximately the size of a football pitch.
Which is, it's amazing how many times people use
So
that.
they saw in the distance 3 sort of orangey red coloured lights in a triangular shape moving in their direction. Now as these lights got closer, they realised it was this black triangular shaped object with these lights attached, appeared to be on the underside at each corner. And they also said at a distance that it was doing this kind of weird wavy type motion. It looked like it was sort of shifting backwards and forwards. Now it's possible that it was some sort of field that was around the object that was causing this distortion, and I've looked into other cases where this same distortion effect has been seen, but there's also many cases where the distortion effect isn't seen, so you know, it's possible some kind of flight mode that they enter where it looks like this. Now this craft continued to get closer to them, and it actually came down in the road and hovered about 10 foot. It was within 40 feet of them, so it was very close. And it hovered about 10 foot off the ground, and they didn't really know what to do. They stood there staring at it.
As I mentioned earlier, the question of who do these craft belong to is not necessarily the best question to ask. There is another much more important question I suggest we need to answer first, and if we answer it, we might find out who they do belong to. The question is this: whereabouts do these craft exist when they are not on display in the sky?
You know, there is a number of cases where the military has tried to intercept these objects, so clearly they are interested in them.
Right.
Why would they want to intercept something if they knew what it was? Sometimes they've shown very unusual characteristics, such as cloaking, sort of materialising or dematerialising, sometimes in a clear sky. Main argument really against them being military would be just the advanced characteristics sometimes displayed.
Where they go in, what they're doing, where they're stored. Well, I suppose if you thought it was man that would created them, then they would probably be in a hangar somewhere. But I don't believe that, and I do think that they're ET, and I just think that's another aspect of ET.
But I'm trying to steer you towards when they're not on display. Where are they? Where, do you think they're? Do you think there are bases?
Well, I think there probably are bases around the world.
ET bases?
Yeah, I think there probably are, because there's still very remote areas. I think the sea is there's been so many sightings of underwater objects.
I've had some cases where they've seen UFOs come up out of and enter the sea.
Right.
Which have been interesting, not flying triangle cases.
If these triangles have got that kind of technology, then maybe they're flying around and we just don't see them, and then they decloak, for want of a better phrase, and they're there.
If we're being visited by extraterrestrials, which I believe that we are, I believe that there's numerous species visiting the Earth, and I believe they've been here a long time and will continue to be here for a long time. I believe that there's some sort of ongoing program that they're working on with the human race, and possibly developing us. Now, it stands to reason that they would have to be somewhere. They're unlikely to just be flying around all the time. So therefore, I'd certainly look into there being a number of bases, possibly here on the planet, maybe up on the moon, that they would use to house these craft.
Right. if we consider undersea or underground bases, you wouldn't be able to pinpoint any areas that you think are more likely than others.
No, no. I think if I was going to have a base underwater, I'd put it in a really deep trench where nobody goes.
There's a number of cases linking with missing time or sort of even mind control. Sometimes aspects of that seem to be involved. And also I've dealt with a number of cases that directly link flying triangle craft with the abduction phenomena.
Right.
So these bases may have been on the planet for a long time, and there's a lot of talk about bases in the depth of the oceans. That would be a very, very good place to put them,
right,
because it's somewhere out of reach of human civilization.
I wondered if plotting all the triangle cases on a map of the UK might give a clue to their origin or indeed their storage location. There does seem to be a significant number in the West Yorkshire and Lancashire region. This region contains large unpopulated areas, has very steep hills, and is also home to the famous UFO hotspot known as Todmorden. Although none of my triangle cases were specifically over Todmorden, I decided to research online news articles and other UFO websites to gather recent black triangle cases in and around the town of Todmorden. I plotted the sightings on a map. All the activity on this map took place recently, between 2010 and 2012. The red arrows indicate where black triangles have been seen moving, and the arrow indicates the direction. The red triangles show where triangular craft have been seen hovering. A total of 9 separate black triangles have been spotted around Todmorden over the last 2 years, and that's just cases that have been reported. There could be hundreds more unreported. The letter M on the map indicates where a classic animal mutilation case took place in 2002. If you're not familiar with animal mutilation and the possible links to UFOs, you might want to watch one of my previous films, Silent Killers. The green line on the map shows the Pennine Way, a popular hiking route winding from north to south through the UK's mountainous Pennine region. Our UFO experts mentioned cases where craft have been witnessed emerging from the sea. I think at this point it is important to point out an incident written about in Jenny Randall's 1983 book, The Pennine UFO Mystery. On Thursday the 14th of August 1980, Andrew Nightingales and a friend were fishing in the Ogden Reservoir at Helmshore, a small new estate near Rawtenstall about 4 miles west of Bacup. It was 8:50 p.m. Suddenly, a circular row of red lights, they think about 9 in all, appeared on the surface of the water just out from the bank. Thinking it was something above them casting its reflection, they quickly glanced upwards. Nothing was there. When they looked back at the water, the lights had vanished. However, within moments they reappeared, pulsing this time. It was quite clear now that they were watching a large circular object underneath the surface of the reservoir. Naturally, they began to panic and fled from the water's edge, dropping behind their expensive fishing tackle at the mercy of any passers-by. As one of them put it afterwards, "There is no way I would go back there until it was daylight." The Todmorden area is littered with reservoirs, some of them on the tops of hills. To the north of Todmorden is a vast expanse of land where there are no roads nor easy access to the land for many square miles. It is one of the largest unpopulated areas in the UK, with a barren mountainous terrain. It's also worth pointing out that the Menwith Hill eavesdropping facility is just 25 miles to the northeast of this area. The Lancashire-West Yorkshire border is very central to the UK as a whole. It contains some very remote landscape and is surrounded by extremely steep hills. Could the triangles be returning to this area and be using it as a base to access some of the other areas where triangles are commonly seen, such as Stafford, Lincolnshire, Derbyshire, East Yorkshire and further afield? Another important thing to note here, there is not a single piece of witness testimony of a silent black triangle landing at a UK military base. If they are returning to a base, they are not returning to known military bases. If I was asked to speculate, I would guess there might be a facility under the land or inside a hill somewhere in the Todmorden area, which is possibly accessed via a water feature such as a lake or reservoir. It's even less easy with the information available to speculate who might be in charge of such a facility, other than whoever is flying the craft. And with that little revelation, let's ask if anyone has managed to film one of these triangles. Photographs are available of the Belgian flying triangles, but video footage of UK flying triangles is sketchy. This footage, kindly provided by researcher John Hansen, certainly isn't 100% conclusive of anything, but it is interesting. The footage filmed in Neath in South Wales shows a triangle of 3 lights which remained stationary for at least 20 minutes, hovering over a property at 3:30 in the morning. There are no street lights or any other conventional reason as to why these lights should have been there. The witness who was shooting the film stated that he wishes he had stayed to film the lights for longer, but for some inexplicable reason went to bed after they hadn't moved for 20 minutes. This footage was broadcast on news channel Russia Today, brought to my attention by John Barry. It shows a triangular light formation over the war-torn area of Palestine. If this is a solid object, could it be exhibiting the cloaking abilities mentioned earlier? Is somebody monitoring the hostilities from the comfort of their advanced craft? UFO researcher Dave Hodrian mentioned that black triangle craft have been associated with alleged abduction cases. The abduction phenomenon will not be covered in this film, but I will make a comment about research which is going on in the UK into this field. There are a number of groups currently operating which claim to support alleged abductees, and this support involves sometimes filming harrowing testimonies of self-claimed abductees' accounts of what they have experienced. In my opinion, the best way to support individuals making such claims is to devise methods which will produce new evidence to either confirm or disprove what they are saying. The self-claimed abductees will only be fully vindicated if and when researchers find strong, tangible evidence. Some organisations claiming to support alleged abductees do not seem interested in finding any tangible evidence, which surely should be the main objective of their organisation. I have had several cases reported to me of abduction, one involving a black triangle UFO. I have interviewed this witness, who interestingly acquired a small triangular scar he cannot account for in the middle of his chest the night he witnessed the black triangle, and he has several hours he cannot account for. I am aware of other witnesses with similar marks on their bodies. The abduction phenomenon is outside the scope of this documentary, but it is something I will be looking into more in the future. The statements made earlier by Dan Sherman are of particular importance here, which is that the NSA in the United States have collaborated on abduction projects and have been monitoring worldwide abductions since the 1960s. Sherman also stated that there may be many projects currently running involving abduction. The quest of my future research into this area will be to devise methods capable of producing tangible evidence as to whether abduction is going on or not.